Montana Territory, 1874. The wind howled low across the valley as Kenzie Gallows ran barefoot through the scrub, her thin shawl catching on the branches of a juniper bush behind her. She yanked it free, heart pounding so loud she could barely hear the thunder of hooves behind her, which her uncle had shouted as she fled the ranch house. "You bring death wherever you go." She did not look back. Her lungs burned. Her skirts were torn. But she did not stop until the sound of horses faded behind her, and the only thing she could hear was the river ahead, babbling over smooth stones. She dropped to her knees at the edge, hands shaking as she splashed water on her face. She was 23 years old, alone, and unwanted. The Gallows family had buried her sister the week before, died in childbirth, like their mother before her. Now they said Kenzie carried a curse, a plague on every woman born to their name. She had no more fight left in her, only the will to keep moving. She followed the river south for 2 days. On the third morning, just before dawn, she collapsed in a field of blue flax and did not get up again. That was where Nash Kersey found her. He had been driving cattle east toward Miles City, his hat low against the rising sun, when he spotted something pale in the grass. He rode closer, dismounted, and found a woman lying still, her lips cracked, her face streaked with dust. "Ma'am?" he asked, kneeling beside her. "Can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, gray-blue, sharp even through the haze of exhaustion. "Water," she rasped. He helped her drink from his canteen, then gently lifted her into the saddle with him. She was light as dry wood. "I'm taking you to the cabin," he said. "You are safe now." She held on weakly, her head resting against his shoulder as the horse began to move. Nash's cabin sat in a quiet hollow beneath the pines, a few miles off the trail. He lived there with his 2 young children, Ruth, age 7, and little Randall, just 4. His wife had died 3 winters back from scarlet fever, and he had not let anyone close since. But as he carried the stranger inside and laid her on the cot, something in his chest cracked open. Ruth peeked from behind the doorframe, her blonde hair braided tidy. "Papa, who is that?" "She needs rest," Nash said. "Fetch me clean water, sweetheart." That night, as the wind whistled through the gaps in the shutters, Kenzie slept with Ruth curled gently at her side, having insisted the woman not be left alone. By morning, Kenzie could sit up. She watched Nash from the cot as he chopped wood outside, sleeves rolled, sweat lining his brow. He moved with quiet purpose, strong hands, steady shoulders. He was different from the men she had known. She tried to leave that afternoon. "I have caused enough trouble," she said, standing in the doorway, her dress still torn at the hem. "I should not stay." Nash looked up from the fence he was mending. "You are not going anywhere. I do not belong here." He wiped his hands on a cloth and met her eyes. "You belong wherever you are treated kind, and that is here. My children already like you. Ruth braided your hair while you were sleeping." Kenzie's fingers moved to her braid. She did not know what to say. "You can stay as long as you need," Nash said. "No one will come looking for you here." She stayed. Days passed slow and soft. Kenzie helped Ruth with her letters and taught Randall how to mend a button. She cooked simple meals, swept the cabin, and drank coffee on the porch with Nash at sunrise. He never pushed her to speak, never asked about the bruises on her arms or the fear that still clung to her shoulders. He just gave her time. One evening, as the sky burned gold and orange, she found him fixing a saddle out back. "I want to earn my place," she said quietly. "You have done too much." He looked up, eyes warm. "You already do. You keep my children safe. You brought laughter back in this house." She stepped closer. "How?" "I have no family, no name worth speaking. They said I was cursed." Nash stood, the saddle creaking as he let it rest on the rail. He took her hand, rough palm closing gently over hers. "You are not cursed, Kenzie. You are a blessing to me." She blinked, tears rising fast. "Why would you say that?" "Because I have not seen my daughter smile like that since her mother died. Because Randall asked if you were going to stay forever. And because you walk into a place and make it feel like home." The silence hung thick between them. Then Kenzie stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. She pressed her face into his chest. He held her, steady and sure. For the first time in years, she felt like she was not running anymore. That night, Nash brought out a blanket, and they sat on the porch while the stars came out. Ruth and Randall had fallen asleep inside. The fire crackled low in the pit. I never thought I would feel safe again, Kenzie said softly, watching the flames. I thought I would die out there. Nash reached over and took her hand. I am glad you did not, he said. I plan on keeping you safe from now on. She looked at him, her heart full. And in that quiet moment, beneath the Montana stars, she believed him. The spring thaw brought mud thick as syrup and a scent in the air that clung to the skin-wet pine. Thawed earth, the clean edge of melting snow high in the hills. Kenzie stood at the edge of the garden plot, a spade in hand, sleeves rolled above her elbows. Her boots sank slightly with each step as she turned the soil, testing its give, its readiness. Nash leaned against the post nearby, a coil of rope slung over one shoulder. You planning to plant this whole patch? She glanced up, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek with the back of her wrist. If it'll grow. Your soil's good. Needs turning, but it holds water. He studied her a moment, the way she squinted into the sun, the way she tested the earth between her fingers. You know farming? Not by choice. She dug the blade into the dirt again. My father put us to work early. Said idle hands brought ruin. Nash moved closer, the rope thudding softly to the ground. That how he explained his own temper? Her grip on the spade faltered, just a beat. He used scripture like a hammer. My sister used to say a man who needs a verse to justify his fists doesn't understand grace. You and your sister were close. Kenzie pressed her palm flat to the soil, grounding herself. She was the only one who listened when I said I saw things before they happened. Dreams, mostly. Small things. A fire. A birth. She believed me. The others said I was touched wrong. Nash didn't speak right away. A bird called from the trees, the slow trill of a western meadowlark. After a while, he said, You still see things? Kenzie stood, brushing her hands on her skirt. Not since I came here. He nodded, as if that made sense. Maybe peace leaves no shadows to warn of. She looked at him then, really looked. You don't think I'm mad? I think there's more to this world than most men are willing to admit, he said. And I think you've learned to read it better than most. Later that day, she found Ruth on the floor near the hearth, drawing on scraps of paper with a charred stick. Randall napped in the corner with a wooden horse still clutched in his hand, his socks half off. Miss Kenzie, Ruth said solemnly, holding up a crude sketch. That's you. And Papa. And us. I made the sun big, 'cause it's warm when we're all together. Kenzie knelt beside her, smoothing the paper. That's the finest drawing I've ever seen. Are you going to stay always? Ruth asked without looking up. Kenzie hesitated, her fingers still. Would you like that? Ruth nodded. You make Papa less quiet. That evening, Nash returned from the barn with a scuffed tin box. He set it on the table. Found this in the loft. Belonged to my wife's mother. She used to keep seeds in it. Kenzie opened the lid slowly. Inside, folded paper packets lay in rows, some labeled in neat script, others faded to pale ghosts. You kept this all this time? Didn't have the heart to throw it. Figured if someone ever came along who knew what to do with them, I'd know. She turned one packet over in her hand. Morning Glories. He sat across from her. You ever think of having a place that's yours? Not just borrowed space, but something with your name on it. I used to, she said. Then I stopped letting myself want things. Nash reached across the table and tapped the seed packet. You can want this. You can want more. Kenzie stared at his hand, calloused, steady, not demanding. After a long pause, she set her hand beside his, not touching, just near. I think I'd like to try, she said. He nodded once, quiet. By the following week, the garden rows were laid out in a grid, and Kenzie had taught Ruth how to press seeds into the dirt 2 knuckles deep. Randall followed behind, patting the earth with a flat board. Nash built a fence around the plot, hammering each post with care. One night, as the fire dimmed low and the children slept, Kenzie stood at the window, arms wrapped around herself. Nash stepped beside her, setting down the tin mug he'd been holding. You miss her, he said. Kenzie didn't need to ask who. Every day. He waited, letting the quiet settle. She wanted to run, Kenzie said, her voice thin. She almost did. But she stayed for me. Took the worst of it, so I wouldn't have to. I think I'm living the life she should have had. I think you're honoring it. Kenzie turned to him then. You've given me a place without asking for anything in return. I don't know how to repay that. I didn't do it for a debt, he said, meeting her gaze. I did it because I saw something worth keeping. This time, When her fingers brushed his, he didn't wait. He took her hand in his, and they stood there, two people forged by loss, watching the dark give way to stars. Neither of them said another word. They didn't need to. The last frost broke one morning with the sound of water dripping from the eaves and the dull creak of trees stretching after a long sleep. Kenzie stepped outside with a basket tucked under her arm, the hem of her skirt brushing the porch boards still damp with dew. She paused, eyes drawn toward the hills where the snow retreated slowly, like a tide pulling back to sea. Behind her, Ruth's laughter broke the hush. "Papa says we can ride to the creek today. He said you can come too, if you want." Kenzie turned, her face warming. "I'd like that." The trail to the creek ran narrow through a stand of lodgepole pine. Nash rode ahead with Randall tucked before him, the boy's arms looped around his father's waist. Kenzie rode beside Ruth, the girl's pony plodding steady beneath her. It had taken weeks for Kenzie to feel steady on a saddle again, but now the sway of the horse beneath her felt like a rhythm she remembered from long ago. "Papa keeps a fishing line in that hollow log," Ruth said, pointing ahead. "He says if you sit quiet long enough, the trout forget you're there. Maybe we'll catch something for supper," Kenzie said. Ruth grinned. "Only if you bring the luck." At the creek's edge, Nash helped Randall down and handed him a small tin cup to scoop water. Kenzie watched from the bank, kneeling to run her fingers through the current. The water was cold and fast, and she let the chill bloom up her arm. "You ever miss the place you came from?" Nash asked, crouching beside her with a line in hand. "No," she said, not looking away from the water. "But sometimes I miss the idea of it. The way it might have been, if things had gone different. That's not the same as wanting to go back." She shook her head. "No, I've done enough of looking behind." They sat quiet for a while, the line drifting in the current. Randall chased dragonflies across the stones, and Ruth collected smooth pebbles in a small sack. Kenzie leaned back on her hands. "Your wife," she said after a while. "What was her name?" "Lydia." Kenzie nodded once. "You speak of her with care. She was careful with me. Figured I'd honor her the same." Kenzie's voice was low. "Does it feel like forgetting, to let someone else in?" "No, not forgetting. More like remembering I'm still here." He glanced over, the line slack in the water, his face open in a way it hadn't been before. "You don't take up her space, Kenzie. You've got your own." She blinked slowly, the words settling deep. That night, after the children had gone to bed, Nash brought out a wooden box from beneath the floorboards. He set it on the table and opened it with care. Inside lay a folded length of faded calico, a tarnished brooch, and an old letter tied with string. "She wrote this before the fever took hold," he said. "Didn't tell me she'd done it until the end." Kenzie didn't reach for it. "You sure you want me to know her like that?" "I think she'd want you to." He slid the letter across the table. Kenzie untied the string and unfolded the paper. The ink faded, but the handwriting sure. She read in silence. When she was done, she folded it back with reverence. She had a strong heart. Nash nodded once. "She did." Kenzie looked up at him. "So do you." The next morning, she woke early and found the children still asleep, their breathing even. She stepped outside and crossed to the garden plot. The first shoots had broken through the soil, pale green and fragile, but reaching. She knelt, her fingers brushing the leaves. Then she stood and walked to the barn, where Nash was brushing down the mare. "I want to build something here," she said. "Not just stay, not just pass through." He turned, brush in hand. "What do you have in mind?" "A schoolhouse. Just one room. For the children nearby, for Ruth and Randall, and any others who need it." He set the brush down. "There's no one better to teach them. I'm not asking for permission. I'm not offering it," he said. "I'm offering help." She let out a breath, and the last of the old weight slid off her shoulders. By midsummer, the foundation was laid. Neighbors came from farther than expected: Mrs. Dolly from the East Ridge, old Mr. Finch with his ox team, even the Thompsons from across the river. They brought hammers, saws, and hands willing to work. Kenzie stood beneath the frame as it rose, her dress streaked with sawdust, her arms sore from lifting beams. Nash worked beside her, and when their eyes met in the half-built doorway, something unspoken passed between them, no longer hope, but certainty. That night, as the sun dipped low and the air held the scent of pine sap and sweat, Nash took her hand as they sat on the porch. "You asked me once why I said you were a blessing," he said. She nodded. It wasn't just for what you did. It's because when you came, you didn't demand a new life. You made one with what you had. She leaned her head against his shoulder. And you gave me room to do it. They sat like that until the stars wheeled high above them, and the last candle inside flickered out. The world was quiet, and everything that mattered was close enough to touch. Late summer brought long evenings stained with orange light, and the scent of sun warmed pine heavy in the stillness. Kenzie stood behind the unfinished schoolhouse, smoothing the edge of a window frame where the wood had splintered. Her hands were calloused now, palms shaped by work, fingers browned from the sun. The school had walls, a roof, and a door that stuck just a little when pulled too tight, but it was standing. Nash approached with a length of canvas folded under his arm. Got this from the trading post. Figured it'd do for a shade tarp until we get shutters built. Kenzie took the fabric, running her hand over the coarse weave. It'll help keep the heat off the children's desks. They'll be in good hands, he said, watching her. You've built something worth more than timber and nails. She tied the fabric to the frame with deliberate knots. I'm not sure I ever believed I could. Nash reached for the other end, fastening it in place. You didn't need to believe it. You only had to do it. The wind shifted through the trees, bending the tall grass in waves. Kenzie looked toward the distant ridge where smoke curled faintly skyward. You ever think about what else might be out there? Beyond the land you know? I used to, he said. Now I think more about what I want to hold on to. She didn't speak for a moment. Then, there's a family near the river Choctaw, I think. I saw their boy watching from the trees while we worked. I called to him, but he ran. Some of the locals keep to themselves, Nash said. Don't mean they aren't watching careful. I was thinking, she said, if I leave a book near the edge of the trees, something simple, maybe he'll take it. Might come closer next time. You trust easy, considering what you've come from. I don't trust easy, she said. But I remember what it was like to want a place at the edge of things not knowing if you'd be welcome. He studied her profile, the way her chin lifted when she was certain of something. Do what your heart tells you. It's rarely been wrong. That evening, she set a primer gently against the hollow of a tree trunk, wrapped in oilcloth to keep the damp out. The next morning it was gone. Inside the cabin, Ruth practiced writing her name on the slate board while Randall sat cross-legged, tracing shapes into flour dust on the table. Kenzie swept the floor, then paused by the window. A boy took the book, she said quietly to Nash, who was carving a new handle for a spade. That means he'll come back. He nodded once. You've got a way of drawing people in. She leaned against the frame. That frightens me sometimes. What if I disappoint them? You disappoint no one, he said. Least of all me. The next week brought rain, steady and cold, pooling in the low ruts of the trail and soaking the hem of her dress as she walked from the barn. Nash had taken the children to the neighbors for the afternoon, leaving her alone for the first time in days. She lit the lamp early, the cabin dim with stormlight. Outside, the wind snapped at the eaves, but inside the silence welcomed her. She moved to the chest where she kept the few things she'd brought from her old life: a broken locket, a length of ribbon, a tin comb with a missing tooth. She held them in her lap, not as wounds, but as proof that she'd survived them. The door opened behind her, and Nash stepped in, boots wet, children's coats slung over his arm. He shook his hat out onto the mat and looked at her sitting there, quiet and still. You all right? He asked. She nodded but didn't rise. I was just thinking about what it means to belong. He set the coats on the hook, then crossed the room and knelt in front of her. You belong here, he said. That's not a kindness. That's a truth. Her breath caught in her chest. You sure? I've built fences and barns and buried people I loved, he said. But I've never been more sure of anything than I am of you. She reached for his hand, her palm steady as it met his. Then let's stop waiting on the wind to change. He rose, drawing her up with him, and they stood in the small circle of lamplight. He kissed her, then not rushed, not searching, but with the quiet certainty of a man who'd found what he never thought to look for. Outside, the wind softened. The rain slowed. And inside, the house held steady, built now not just of logs and nails, but of something far stronger. By early autumn, the cottonwoods along the river burned gold, their leaves drifting down in slow spirals. The schoolhouse stood finished and proud, a modest structure of hand-hewn planks with smoke curling from its chimney each morning. Inside, the benches had been sanded smooth, the slate board hung true, and Kenzie had stitched curtains from old flour sacks, dyed with crushed berries until they took on a soft, dusky red. One morning, as she lit the stove before the children arrived, she heard the faint creak of the door and turned to find a boy standing just inside, no more than 9, dark-eyed and silent. He clutched the primer she'd left weeks earlier, the corners worn from handling. She stepped back from the stove. "You're welcome here." He didn't speak, but he crossed the threshold and sat at the edge of the back bench, shoulders tense. By the week's end, 2 more children from families that kept to the wooded edges had joined him. Kenzie didn't ask questions. She taught them letters and numbers, but also how to listen to the wind for weather, how to read the bend of animal tracks in the earth. They absorbed it all, quiet and still, like the land itself. That Sunday, Ruth pressed a folded paper into Kenzie's palm after church. On it was a drawing of the schoolhouse, smoke rising from the chimney, a figure in a dress standing in the doorway. "It's not finished," Ruth said, "but it's getting close." Kenzie crouched to meet her eye. "It's more than I ever imagined." Later that evening, while the children played with pine cones and string beside the hearth, Kenzie sat across from Nash at the table, mending the torn sleeve on Randall's shirt. "There's a letter for you," Nash said, setting an envelope on the table. "Came through the trading post. From Miles City." Her breath caught. "No one writes to me. You might want to read it anyway." She wiped her hands and opened it carefully, scanning the page. After a long pause, she said, "It's from the midwife who helped my sister. She says there's a girl half-orphan being sent to a boarding school in Helena. She wanted to know if I'd take her here instead." Nash leaned forward. "Would you?" Kenzie folded the letter slowly. "If she comes, she'll need a place where she's not looked at sideways. I can give her that." "You could give her more," he said. "This place could be hers too." Kenzie looked at him. "If you mean for her to stay with us, I do," he said. "If you'll say yes." She held his gaze. "I thought I'd forgotten how to say yes to anything lasting." "You didn't forget," he said. "You just hadn't been asked the right way." She let out a long breath, something unknotted inside her chest. "Yes. To the girl. To you. To all of it." He reached across the table and took her hand, thumb brushing the seam of her knuckles. "I've loved you quiet for some time now, watching you build something out of nothing. Watching you look after my children like they'd always been yours." Kenzie's voice was steady. "I've never felt more rooted than I do here with you." That night, she lay beside him for the first time, the fire still flickering low. They didn't speak as they settled beneath the quilt, but her fingers found his, and he pulled her gently close. No promises spoken, but every breath they shared said it plain they belonged. That winter, the girl from Miles City arrived in a wagon driven by a traveling parson. Her name was Eliza, and she had a quietness about her that reminded Kenzie of herself. She was small for her 12 years, her hands always folded, as if bracing. But Ruth took her hand without hesitation, and Randall offered her the smoother of his 2 wooden horses. Kenzie gave her the cot beside the stove and a space at her side each morning as she lit the lamps in the schoolhouse. Eliza watched more than she spoke, but by spring, she was reading aloud with confidence and walking with her shoulders set straighter. That spring, Nash and Kenzie married beneath the cottonwoods, the river swollen with melt. Ruth carried a crown of wildflowers, and Randall held tight to Kenzie's hand until Nash took it in his own. The neighbors gathered, bringing bread and tins of preserves. Someone played a fiddle. Someone else brought a quilt stitched in squares of old dresses and shirts. When Nash spoke his vows, he said only, "You gave me back my life, and I'll spend the rest of it giving you peace." Kenzie's voice didn't waver. "You gave me a place to stand, and I'll never leave it." They built a larger home that summer, closer to the schoolhouse, with 3 rooms and a porch wide enough for shelling beans in the afternoon. Kenzie kept the old locket, but placed it in a drawer she didn't open often. Some memories had done their work and could rest now. Ruth learned to ride bareback. Randall insisted on carrying a lunch pail every morning, even when it was empty. Eliza grew into her voice, and one day, out of nowhere, called Kenzie Ma, and didn't look away when she did it. They planted fruit trees behind the house apple and plum, and Nash kept bees in a pair of hives he'd built himself. Kenzie taught the children to dry herbs and boil starch for ink. The schoolhouse grew full, and when the benches couldn't hold them all, The older students helped build more. At night, Nash and Kenzie sat on the porch in the long hush before sleep, his hand always finding hers. The valley was quiet, but no longer empty. And everything they'd built, each fence post, each word on the slate, each thread in the curtain, held the shape of a life made not from what they'd lost, but from what they'd chosen. Together, always.